Monday on CNN.
I'm Becky Anderson in London, and this is CNN.
The U.S. government is still in deadlock. Is a potential compromise in the cards? I'm Maggie Lake in New York. Nina DeSantos is in London, and Pauline Chu is in Hong Kong. Welcome to World Business Today. As the White House says it would accept a short-term fix to avoid a default, Japan and China urged the U.S. to end the uncertainty before the crisis spreads overseas.
The final day of one of Asia's biggest economic summits is overshadowed by talks on a free trade agreement.
And violence breaks out at protests in Brazil after thousands of people march in support of striking teachers.
Well, as we enter week 2 of the fiscal crisis in Washington, here are the very latest developments. The White House says it would accept a short-term rise in the debt ceiling to help avoid a first-ever default on U.S. debt. And Senate Democrats are readying a so-called clean debt ceiling bill with no conditions attached. But that is expected to get nowhere in the House, with only 9 days to go before the U.S. reaches its debt limit. Republicans there are still demanding concessions before they vote to raise the debt ceiling. Meantime, President Obama is blasting House Speaker John Boehner for not letting the House vote on a bill to end the partial government shutdown.
The reason that Speaker Boehner hasn't called a vote on it is because he doesn't apparently want to see the government shutdown end at the moment.
The president had us all down to the White House last week, only to remind me that he was not going to negotiate.
The crisis in Washington is setting off alarm bells around the world. China and Japan are raising the pressure on the U.S. to get its finances in order. The two countries have loaned the U.S. a combined $2.4 trillion by buying U.S. bonds. A default would mean they're not getting their interest payments. Now, Beijing says Washington must quickly find a solution.
We ask that the United States earnestly take steps to resolve in a timely way the political issues around the debt ceiling and prevent a U.S. debt default by October 17th to ensure the safety of Chinese investments in the U.S. and the global economic recovery. This is the U.S.'s responsibility.
Now, other leaders at the APEC summit in Indonesia also expressed their concerns about the stalemate in the U.S., and we'll take you live to Bali later in this program.
Well, with the debt ceiling deadline a little over a week away, Washington needs a solution, and quick. Brianna Keeler has the latest from Washington.
Ramping up the pressure on House Republicans, Senate Democrats will introduce a bill today that would increase the debt ceiling for more than a year. The goal, push this hot potato issue beyond the 2014 midterm elections. The bill has no strings attached, no agreement to change Obamacare, no budgetary bartering.
I cannot do that under the threat that if Republicans don't get 100% of their way, they're going to either shut down the government or they are going to default on America's debt.
The president still says he won't bargain with the country's ability to pay its bills.
The president's refusal to negotiate is hurting our economy and putting our country at risk.
House Speaker John Boehner insists a debt ceiling increase without some concessions from the White House will never get past his Republicans. He says the same about a government funding bill, though Democrats question that.
One surefire way to find out whether the bill would pass is to have a vote on it.
Only one thing is for certain. Americans are not impressed, especially with Republicans. In a new CNN ORC International poll, 63% of those surveyed blame the GOP for the shutdown. 57% point the finger at Democrats, and 53% hold President Obama accountable. 8 days into the partial government shutdown, 9 days from breaching the debt ceiling, here are some ways this could all play out. Perhaps a long-term proposal like what the Senate is taking up. If that doesn't fly, there could be a short-term measure to buy time. Or both sides could keep talking past each other until the U.S. defaults, and there's bipartisan agreement. That would be an economic disaster.
And Brianna Keeler joins us now live from the White House. Brianna, that poll, I mean, they're blaming Republicans, but boy, it's pretty close. It should just be losing all around. I have no idea how they could possibly be looking at this and thinking that anyone is going to come out of this looking good. The American people so angry at Congress, and increasingly so are business leaders. I'm told actually that we don't have Brianna. She's just finishing up, of course, chasing that story. We are going to come back to her in just a moment. Now I'm told we have her. This is a fast-moving story. What do we want? Brianna, are you with us?
I am with you. So let me give you a little sense, Maggie, of how things are kind of shifting here in Washington. You know, all of these bills that have been going back and forth lately between the House and the Senate, they've really dealt with the government shutdown, with trying to fund the government. Well, now we're seeing a bit of a change. The Senate now trying to move on to avoiding that disastrous default as we're getting uncomfortably close to the debt ceiling. So basically what we have going on, Maggie, is that they're going to bring up a bill today. This is what we're expecting from Senate Democrats. It would fund, or I should say, it would increase the debt ceiling for approximately a year or more. The idea here is to take what's really a political hot potato and push it beyond the midterm elections, which would be November of next year. So the timing on this would be you'd see a preliminary vote, which is really a procedural vote, but still important on Saturday, and then you wouldn't see the final vote perhaps as late as Wednesday. It could speed up to be a little closer to us, but you're looking at possibly Wednesday the latest for a final vote, and then, you know, Thursday is the day for the debt ceiling. And what's really all unclear still in all of this is if the Senate is to move forward with this, and we call it jamming. The idea is that they try to get something, and at the last minute they throw it the way of the House of Representatives, hoping that they kind of just swallow a bitter pill. But it's still really unclear whether the House of Representatives will do that. In fact, you're hearing from a lot of Republicans, you're hearing from House Speaker John Boehner, where they say that what's called a clean debt ceiling increase, a debt ceiling increase without any concessions tacked onto it, that it is just not going to pass the House. So even though you have this movement in the Senate, there's still all of this uncertainty, and this is really being set up to be this cliffhanger with a really uncertain outcome.
And cliffhanger with no time left. I mean, right up against the wire. I think that's what has investors so concerned. Brianna, what should we look for now in the coming days to find out whether this is going to go or not? It gets really confusing for people from the outside, but that made sense to me, jamming it down, hoping that those centrist Republicans in the House break ranks with the more conservative side and force a vote on it. Should we be looking at the rhetoric? Do we need to see that soften? Do we need to see olive branches extended to have any confidence that that vote is going to get through? What do we need to watch?
I think at this point, what a lot of folks are watching is to see how the markets respond, because right now you have kind of both sides really digging in their heels. House Republicans, the White House, and Democrats, really neither side is moving. They're not talking. But I think the one thing in sort of my years of covering Washington has been when the markets send a very strong signal. Now, no politician will tell you that they want to rattle the markets. They certainly don't. I mean, when you look back to 2011, just to give you a sense, Maggie, even though at the 11th hour they came up with a debt ceiling solution to increase the debt ceiling, you had the downgrade by S&P. The Monday following the downgrade, Americans lost $1 trillion in the stock market. There are certain things when you're talking, when people freak out when they're looking at the markets. That is something that could sort of pressure the two sides. But for right now, honestly, they're just dug in and there's no movement.
And Brianna, you and I both know that that is the definition of insanity, when you have to have Americans lose $1 trillion worth of their net worth in order to force their politicians to move. It's absolutely unbelievable. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Brianna, thank you so much for explaining what can be a very complicated process for those of us who are not in D.C. Great to see you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So let's turn our attention to the markets. As we wait for the opening bell on Wall Street, futures are pointing to a mostly flat open for U.S. stocks. But the Dow begins Tuesday's session at its lowest level in a month, and investors are bracing for the beginning of earnings season. We're not just watching Washington. We also have earnings coming out. Metals giant Alcoa releases its third quarter results after the closing bell today. Let's get a trader's perspective on all of this now. Scott Shalady is Senior Vice President of Derivatives at the brokerage firm Trine Group. He joins us from the CME Group in Chicago. Scott, I don't know if you were able to hear what Brianna was saying at the end of our discussion, but they're worried that it's going to take a market sell-off for Congress to get its act together and do something about it. And that strikes me as a very dangerous game to play.
Well, it also strikes me as a very naughty game to play. I think, depending on what side of the aisle you're on, some folks on one side would like to see that chaos to advance an agenda versus the other. So here we sit with our government maybe putting their hand on the nuclear option, which may or may not be default. I think the traders behind me will say that the idea of a default or the chance of a default is very, very slim, and smart money is waiting to buy on those dips. But unfortunately, the sell-off that we've seen here has not been participated with some decent fund manager selling. It's been the retail investor, the mom and pop selling. So they're the ones that are taking this hit, and the fund managers and the big investors are waiting for any type of sell-off to get back into the market because they don't believe we're going to see a default.
That's a really, really important distinction, and it's bad news long term if it's retail people who are once again disappointed and losing faith in the system. Talk to me about that sell-off, though, because I have heard this as well. The reason we're not seeing more of a reaction is because, you know, even as bad as things got in prior crises, if you had the stomach to buy on those lows, boy, you made a lot of money. Is that what everyone's holding out for, and how long does that psychology stay intact, Scott?
Well, that psychology will stay intact at least for another 2 weeks or until we see some sort of resolution here. But it definitely is the case that where we lost that retail investor in the early 2000s and then again in 2008, and it's been a difficult time getting them back into the market. And this is just another example of how that they're going to see their confidence take another hit, because you're going to see that retail investor have to play this defensively because it's their money that they're waiting to retire on, where you've got the institutional investor kind of waiting to see any flush in the market because that has been an opportune time to buy, and that's what they're going to go forward with. Now, in the big scheme of things, you know what? Our economy's not doing well. This is going to mean the taper idea is off the table, and regardless of whether we get a flush or not, the stock market's going to do well, even though you think that may sound silly because the economy's not doing well. But we're going to continue that accommodation. Take a look at this thing in the big picture. Accommodation continues, that stock market marches higher, and maybe we see that 10-year yield go lower. So those institutional investors can't wait to get their hands on more stocks.
They can't. It's a complicated situation. It's so hard for people to make sense of it. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. Scott Shalady from the Trine Group. And Nina, it's such an important distinction that Scott was making between what professionals do and retail investors, and it matters.
Yeah, he certainly makes a very good point there. Somebody else who's been making a good point, though, in the last half hour, Maggie, is the International Monetary Fund's own chief economist, Olivier Blanchard. He's currently presenting a biannual report on the state of the global economy. I might add they've decided to cut their growth forecast for the world economy in 2014. Let's listen in.
Let me summarize. The recovery from the crisis continues. I think that's a fact, an important one, but too slowly. And while the focus this time is more on emerging market economies, other legacies of the crisis are still very much present. Advanced economies are not out of the woods. Public debt, and in some cases private debt, remain very high, and fiscal sustainability is not a given. The architecture of the financial system is still evolving, and its future shape and solidity are still unclear, a theme which will be developed in the presentation of the GFSR tomorrow. Unemployment remains very high and will remain high for a long time. So these challenges remain, and I think they will be the major challenges we face in the years to come. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to your questions now. Please identify yourselves. Wait for the microphone and identify yourselves. The gentleman up here front.
Thanks. Barry Wood, RTHK in Hong Kong. Mr. Blanchard, looking at these numbers, 2.9% global growth in 2013. That's the lowest number in 4 years. Is the world economy in danger of slipping back into recession? And why, after all this stimulus in the advanced economies, is this recovery so sluggish? We know about the reasons that you often give, the Eurozone, austerity, fiscal consolidation of the states, but overall, why is it so much lower than you had predicted earlier?
These are very, very good questions. is the world economy likely to slip back into recession, where we don't have an arbitrary, we don't have a number under which this happens. But I think there are reasons to be relatively optimistic. As you'll notice, I have avoided giving you the growth number for the world as a whole, because I think that in some ways it is a meaningless number. I think if you look, what you have is these two evolutions. I think you have a recovery of advanced economies, and these are the economies which were sick. And therefore, it's very important that recovery is, looking forward, going to be a bit stronger. And then you have a slowdown in emerging market countries, but it's still the case that they are going fairly fast. And if they do some of the structural reforms that they intend to do, they should be able to continue. So I think on net, although the global growth number is not impressive, I think that the news on net is rather good. Those countries which were sick are less sick than they were, and the others are slowing down, but I wouldn't call this sickness. So I think that's the answer to the first part of your question. The second is, why is it that growth is still so low in a way, and say lower than in 2010? I think what happened in 2010 was the recovery from an acute illness, and many things could be repaired relatively easily. When you go down a lot, it's easier to go up fast, and then there are some breaks which are easy to identify, and they can be removed. And I think that's what we saw. We're now in a different situation in which what needs to be done is more complex. These are more complex reforms of the financial system, more complex fiscal reforms, so that there is no easy gain. And I think that's what is being reflected. There is also probably a bit of adjustment fatigue, which is leading to maybe less reforms than would be desirable.
Okay, can I take the lady over there?
Okay, so that's Olivier Blanchard there, the chief economist of the International Monetary Fund, kicking things off mid this week, because remember that the IMF and World Bank annual meetings will be taking place later on in the week. And what he said in his biannual economic report of the world economy will give them plenty to talk about. Let me bring you the latest forecast that the IMF have come out with. According to Mr. Blanchard's research, they've decided to cut the global growth forecast to 2.9% for next year, 2014, from 3.6%. Here's the interesting bit. They've also cut their forecasts for the United States by a whole percentage point there. They've cut their forecast for China and, interestingly enough, decided to raise their forecast for the Eurozone. You just heard him there mention the words adjustment fatigue could sap the impetus for reform. They've put the pressure on Japan, saying that Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister over there, really does need to change the labour reforms. That after Japan was saying that perhaps that might take a back seat for the next couple of years. The IMF is staunch and resolute, saying that Japan will only see a recovery if it continues to try and reform its labour force. So the stalemate in Washington and what's going on there in the IMF continues to give people plenty to think about on the European markets. Let's have a look at how things are doing at the moment. As we were just saying before, Olivier Blanchard decided to raise the forecast that the IMF has for the Eurozone for next year. Official data from Germany has also given us something to think about today. Exports there picking up slightly for the month of August, but they're only up around about 1%, while imports, on the other hand, rose nearly 0.5%. And that brings this country, remember the biggest country in the Eurozone's trade surplus, to $17.8 billion in total. Well, separately, factory orders unexpectedly dropped by 0.3% for the month of August. So obviously, everybody relying very much on the German economic machinery to bring the Eurozone out of its current impasse. As I was saying before, Pauline, the IMF did raise its forecast for the Eurozone, but it is still in negative territory. It expects it to shrink by just a little bit less than it did before.
Yeah, Nina, Olivier Blanchard there of the IMF also mentioned that there is this slowdown in emerging markets, and many of those countries are in the Asia-Pacific region, and the Asia-Pacific nations agree to work for a win-win, but their differences remain. We will be live from Bali, Indonesia in just a moment to find out what comes after APEC.
Welcome to the land where the sun never sets. Where 1,000 cultures tell a fascinating story. Where 1,000 recipes leave you asking for more. Where untainted nature warms your heart. Let yourself go in a country that feels like a dream. Extraordinary, fascinating Nigeria. No wahala.
Human to Hero in association with Nikon.
日本の文化、伝統文化であるし、柔道は本当に日本人の心そのものだと思うので。My name is Kaori Matsumoto. I'm 25 years old. 57キロ級で日本で初めてのオリンピック金メダルを取りました。すべての感情が詰まったオリンピックでした。本当にそこが大きくて、で取ったからもやっぱりすべてが勝って、今までの人生ずっとすべてをかけていたので、やっぱり勝負するときはやっぱり勝負師なんで、あの身になって戦います。
To see a new world, we try. To see a new world, we explore. To see a new world, we don't give up. We try and try. Maybe it's because we want to see a new world. Let's try together, and let's go see a new world.
The two-day APEC summit has wrapped up today in Bali, Indonesia. Every year at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, leaders pause for a group photo wearing shirts that reflect the host nation's style and culture. On the sidelines, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry spoke with the member nations of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's a separate initiative aimed at creating a free trade agreement for 12 Asian-Pacific countries. CNN's Anna Corin joins us live now from Bali with more on that angle. Anna, the TPP appears to be grabbing some of the spotlight away from the APEC summit itself. What kind of progress was made on those trade talks?
Well, as far as the TPP leaders are concerned, there was progress. That was announced in their statement, and that they were on track for that deadline at the end of the year. But there are serious questions being raised as to whether they will actually achieve that. 12 nations, as you mentioned, from Vietnam to Japan to Chile, a third of world trade, 40% of the global economy. I mean, there is huge potential here in jobs and in growth. This was meant to be chaired by the US President Barack Obama, so his absence really felt here as far as the TPP leaders are concerned. There are a couple of countries, Pauline, who are really digging their heels in, if you like. They have some serious concerns as to how this will in fact play out. They are Malaysia, they are Vietnam and Japan. Some of their concerns are intellectual property of state-owned enterprises, labour, and obviously the liberalisation of some industries like agriculture. For Japan, that is huge. You mentioned a little bit earlier in your program Shinzo Abe's Abenomics and how he is really trying for structural reform in that country. Well, this is a major sticking point for him. Agriculture is very protected within Japan, so that is a huge problem for the TPP moving forward. This is something that they will be addressing at the World Trade Organization meeting also here in Bali in December. Whether they meet that deadline, though, at the end of the year remains to be seen. This is very important to the United States. The reason being it's part of their rebalancing strategy, if you like, part of their Asia pivot, not just in foreign policy, but also as far as economics are concerned. This is to counter the rise of China. And Pauline, I can tell you that China has been extremely active during this APEC summit. You know, the Chinese President Xi Jinping, he addressed the Indonesian Parliament, the first foreign president to do such. He also has signed trade deals with Indonesia and, you know, also visited Malaysia. So has been exceptionally active, Pauline.
Yeah, we can see that, especially since President Obama could not make it. And the TPP, as you mentioned, very important to the U.S. because they are really leading the push for this trade-free zone. Anna Corin, they're live in Bali. Thank you very much. Nina.
Pauline, you're watching World Business Today. Changes are coming from top to bottom at Lufthansa, including with the CEO. In a moment's time, we'll show you what to expect.
Welcome to the world's 9th largest country, seated in the heart of the Eurasian continent. To the country that has access to a potential market of 500 million people. To Central Asia's strongest economy with the most attractive tax climate in the Commonwealth of Independent States and Eastern Europe. Make use of the state program of accelerated industrialization that made us number 10 in the World Investor Protection List. Join those who are already joining this. Discover, explore, invest in Kazakhstan.
The 9th edition of the Women's Forum Global Meeting will be held between the 16th and 18th of October in Deauville, France. This year's focus, the open world. Compete, cooperate, create. The 3-day event gathers 1,300 participants from 80 countries around the world, composed of remarkable men and women who are involved in politics, business, civil society, and academia.
Welcome back. The CEO of Lufthansa recently announced that he's going to be leaving Europe's largest airline group for the Swiss drugs maker Roche. Well, many have asked why Christoph Franz, this man, would go in the middle of the company's biggest overhaul, one that he himself actually started. In fact, Lufthansa recently announced its largest aircraft order ever. It's buying 59 Airbus and Boeing wide-body jets that will slash its fuel bill from here on. All of this is part of hundreds of changes that this firm is making in its so-called SCORE program. Christoph Franz told CNN's Richard Quest that the carrier will have reached many milestones by the time that he leaves.
Basically, I feel that we are on our way, and with a different speed and different ways of finding solutions, it has become quite obvious that all the big guys are not in a position to leave the marketplace, but we have to reinvent ourselves. And this is exactly the way forward of the Lufthansa Group, by redefining the way how we are addressing point-to-point traffic in Europe. We have decided to use the existing low-cost platform, Germanwings, and to basically triple it in size. And on the other side, we are heavily investing into quality, heavily investing into new aircraft, and heavily also redesigning the formula of our products in the long-haul business.
We are moments away from the start of a new session on Wall Street. We will bring you all the action. Stay with us.
Innovation Exchange, in association with Standard Bank.
In a desert village more hospitable to camels, the UAE's Bedouin Pass converges with 21st century satellite technology. On the edge of the Emirate of Sharjah, you'll find the research and development hub of Thuraya Telecommunications.
People in general are much more aware of the need to have satellite communications. Even if they don't use it as much, you know, people like to have that as an insurance policy. This is where we test different pieces of equipment.
In this small lab, Thuraya welcomes a South Korean developer. Together, they created the Sat Sleeve, the world's first device that gives a standard iPhone the power of satellite communication.
Innovation Exchange, in association with Standard Bank.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the land of FC Barcelona, where ground temperature is currently excited, reaching feverish around kickoff. The weather was brought to you by Qatar Airways, proud partner of FC Barcelona.
CNN original series Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, Copenhagen.
Denmark is like the happiest place on earth.
Go on a culinary adventure through one of the best restaurants in the world. Pushing you to rethink what's edible.
It's like I've never tasted a green vegetable that good.
Where it comes from.
Let's grab a bunch of these for lunch, no?
And how it reflects the Danish landscape and culture.
Cheers.
Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, Copenhagen, only on CNN. This month on CNN Go, plunge into Dubai. From palm-shaped islands to the world's tallest building.
It's just absolutely amazing.
We travel through desert landscapes and dine at one of the world's finest restaurants. Explore the glitz and glamour of Dubai in a luxury edition of CNN Go. Wednesday on CNN. In association with Korean Air.
I'm Pauline Chu in Hong Kong, and this is CNN.
Welcome back to World Business Today. We have begun a new trading session here in the U.S. And if we take a look at the big board, you can see we are seeing fractional selling right now on blue chips. We heard from a trader earlier, very important. Institutional, professional traders are hanging in there. They think things are going to get resolved in Washington. That is good news, but do not let that fool you, and do not let the market calm fool you into thinking that there will be no economic fallout from this. Gallup just out with a poll. Confidence in the past week, consumer confidence, fell more than any other week since the Lehman Brothers crisis. It's the second largest drop since they started keeping track of this back in 2008. It is the retail investors that have been selling and taking us to a one-month low. They're the people who buy things. They're the people who matter in the economy. Professional sellers are not, and that's why you're seeing the markets calm. Very, very important distinction. Pauline?
Yeah, and they're easily scared when there's this kind of uncertainty and volatility. Well, we'll get back to business news in just a moment, but first, here are some of the top world news stories that we're following. The death toll has risen in the Lampedusa tragedy. Italy's Coast Guard says the number of bodies recovered from last week's shipwreck is now 231. Divers are continuing to work at the site of this disaster. The European Union is gearing up to propose a save and rescue program along the Mediterranean. The Nobel Prize for Physics was awarded to two scientists for their work on the so-called God particle. It's also known as the Higgs boson particle. Nearly 50 years ago, Peter Higgs and Francois Englert predicted the particle's existence. Scientists say Higgs boson will help unlock the secrets of how the universe works. Argentina's President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner is expected to have surgery after a blood clot was found on the surface of her brain. Doctors decided to operate right away when she reported a tingling sensation in her left arm and also lost some muscle strength. In Brazil, demonstrations supporting better pay for teachers have turned violent. Protesters fought with police and burned vehicles on Monday in Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo. Demonstrators in Sao Paulo turned over a car that quickly exploded. Teachers have been holding peaceful rallies for weeks now, demanding pay increases.
Yeah, well, CNN's producer Barbara Alfranidis is live in Sao Paulo and joins us there from Brazil this afternoon. Barbara, how violent have things been? If you look at some of the pictures, they're pretty bad.
Well, protests have gotten increasingly violent in Rio de Janeiro, and riot police and demonstrators are increasingly clashing. Last night, as you can see from the pictures, they did set alight buses. At least 20 banks were targeted, public and private buildings. Now, the police have retaliated. These are riot police retaliated by using tear gas. Now, Rio de Janeiro has been very aggressive with the demonstrators. In Sao Paulo, similar protests did happen, but they were on much more of a minor scale. Now, we do have to say that earlier in the day in Rio, at least 10,000 protesters marched peacefully, and these were teachers protesting against better pay and better working conditions. Nina?
Yeah, Barbara, we've seen a number of protests happen over the last 6 months or so. The last time we saw these kind of pictures, it was because bus fares were rising. What about the general sentiment about the cost of living and the fact that Brazil's economy isn't as robust as it once was?
Well, I think that's absolutely right, Nina. I mean, people are really angry on the streets because they do see the cost of living getting higher and higher and more difficult, and yet they're not seeing the return. And that's becoming increasingly problematic. Now, there's also a question of corruption. So people are getting really upset about government corruption, and that's also angering people. In this case, it was a question of teachers' pay. Now, they've been protesting for 2 months now. Nina?
All right, Barbara Arvanides, thank you so much for joining us there in Sao Paulo with those pictures that we saw from yesterday evening of those riots and protests on the street. Yet again, it just goes back to the fact that those emerging markets, Maggie, as you and I know, aren't quite as robust as they once were. And of course, with things looming in the United States, this is a concern for them too.
Absolutely, and it also underscores that there is a sort of dichotomy between the haves and the have-nots, and a lot of sort of, wage disparity and economic injustice fueling a lot of the unrest we're seeing everywhere. Let's return to Wall Street for a look at how stocks are faring now that trading is underway. Allison Kosik is standing by at the New York Stock Exchange. And Allison, a lot of people commenting on the fact that the markets are hanging in despite the fact that this deadlock in Washington continues.
You know, another factor of what you're seeing is the fact that a lot of investors are just sitting on the sidelines waiting for Washington to get its act together as we enter into day 8 of this government shutdown. You're looking at stocks pretty flat at the moment. The Dow down only about 23 points. But that's after the blue chips lost more than 130 points yesterday. You know, it's that debt ceiling that really continues to be the bigger worry than the budget impasse, which really looks to be no closer to any resolution. And analysts say we're likely to just kind of tread water until the October 17th deadline, which is in about, a little less than a week, about a week. Concerns about the ceiling really overshadowing the other big thing happening today, the kickoff of third quarter earnings season after the bell. So after the close, we're going to be hearing from Alcoa and Yum Brands. Remember, though, Alcoa is no longer a member of the Dow, so it's not as closely watched as it once was, but it does still give us a general sense of global economic health. You know, some firms have actually cut Alcoa's earnings estimates based on lower aluminum price forecasts. As for Yum Brands, the key topic there is going to be what the company says about China, where it gets half its revenue. Yum is the parent company of KFC, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut, and it's really struggled in China over the past year because of all those food safety issues. So any signs that business there isn't going well, you could wind up seeing a pullback in Yum shares. Maggie?
Yeah, it's been very difficult, but Yum continuing to focus on emerging markets. They're doubling down and they're staying in the region, assuming this is just a phase. All right, Allison, thank you so much. Earnings are going to be very important here. Meanwhile, let's get back to sort of the broader issue of how businesses are coping with this shutdown. They're hoping lawmakers are going to get their act together soon. Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz expressed his disappointment over the deadlock in Washington. He's just the latest to sound off. In a letter to other business chiefs, he wrote, "I don't pretend that both parties are equally to blame for this crisis, but I do think they are equally responsible for leading us to a solution." Tim Pawlenty, the CEO of the Financial Services Roundtable, which lobbies on behalf of the financial industry, and the former Republican governor of Minnesota, gave his 2 cents to CNN's Jake Tapper.
It's a real concern. If you look at Congress, unfortunately, it's become a Congress that only acts in a crisis. So now we have a real deadline with potentially cataclysmic consequences if they don't act. So when everybody's backs up against the wall, we hope and believe they will act, but they are so dug in, there's some chance they could stumble into a default. We don't want that, and I hope that they'll find a solution.
Well, people like Schultz and Pawlenty aren't the only CEOs to be frustrated over the political stalemate. In Washington, there's a whole chorus out there. Take a listen.
The debt ceiling really doesn't make any sense. It makes absolutely no sense to let it be used as a lever for other things. I mean, if you want to change the laws on abortion or immigration or you name it, tax laws, whatever, let that be a piece of legislation that people hammer out. But to tie it to something about whether you break the promises of the United States government to people all over the world, as well as its own citizens, just makes no sense. So it ought to be banned as a weapon. I mean, it should be like a nuclear bomb.
We're going to have a thundering crisis. We're going to have debt ceiling crises. We're going to have CR crises. We're going to have multi-thousand-point market meltdowns before the dream walkers in the Beltway down there wake up and realize they have to deal with reality.
Congress has a lower approval rating than colonoscopies, which are important and save lives, let's be clear. Clear that we as citizens are frustrated. And one of the things, and one of the reasons why I was so compelled to write the book was that I feel this technology can be a way for us to actually get a government that is more responsive and responsible to us.
As if you needed another reminder, the official debt ceiling deadline is October the 17th, and that's just 1 week from Thursday. Well, coming up next on World Business Today, a victory in Europe for electronic cigarette makers. We'll bring you an expert on that, which could be an important export for the United States, to talk about the decision here in Europe. That's after the break.
Sail in time with Rolex, supporter of the International Sailing Federation.
Okay, ready for tack. Going over here. Tacking. Come on. Keep going.
The women on SCA are on a charge.
I'm full speed.
Just ahead, Abu Dhabi Ocean Racing appear to be pushing even harder.
Okay, sign up. Come in for attack, guys. Dagger board down.
There is no margin for error. The round-the-world race yachts with their professional crews pass within touching distance of smaller yachts.
Why this watch? This watch has seen gale-force winds, incredible sights, and craft and crew become one. It's marked the most challenging seas, the longest nights, and charted a course for the bravest of brave. It doesn't just tell time, it tells history.
Welcome back to World Business Today, live from Hong Kong, London, and New York. Let's check on oil prices right now. Off the back of the IMF just cutting the global growth forecast, we're actually seeing oil prices up so far today. NYMEX crude is up 0.7%. It's trading at $103 a barrel. Brent crude, the international benchmark, is also rising, up about 0.8%, trading right now at $110 a barrel. Nina.
Well, speaking of oil, the government of Somalia, Pauline, is trying to persuade the world's biggest energy companies to come and explore for oil there. Several of them had operations in Somalia before 1991, but that was when civil war broke out across the country, forcing overseas companies to get out of Somalia fast. For most of the next 2 decades, warring parties battled it out. The first permanent government was only just established in Somalia a little over a year ago. Relative peace has helped this economy to recover, but Somalia is still one of the poorest countries anywhere in the world. And its economy is also in dire shape too. Key sources of revenue and external aid are remittances and money sent home by Somalis abroad. In fact, the World Bank estimates that overseas remittances are likely to top more than $1 billion a year. That, of course, is a major contributor to the Somali economy. But the real issue we're going to be talking about now is oil and gas. Joining me now is Abdirazak Omar Mohammed, Somalia's Natural Resources Minister, who's in our London office today. And one of the reasons why you're here, welcome, is that you're drumming up business. You've just come back from a conference. How has investor appetite been in Somalia?
Well, thank you, Nina, for giving me this opportunity to talk to you today. I have come for this oil and gas summit that was organized by some of the major companies in the industry. And I came to showcase that Somalia is ready to attract investors, potential investors for oil and gas.
Ready, How ready? Because there are security concerns, piracy concerns. You can't get the oil past Somalia, let alone get it out of Somalia.
Well, over the last few months, the security situation of the country has improved a lot. If you look at statistics on piracy, piracy has declined 93% over the last 2 years. There hasn't been any piracy attack or any hijacking throughout this year. So these are all indicators that the security has returned back to Somalia. I'm not saying it's 100%, we are not there yet, but it's close to 100%. And we are ready to invite all the companies to come back to Somalia.
Let's have a look at the kind of oil revenues that you could have. It's been estimated that your country holds around about 2.7 billion barrels of proved oil reserves. That could revolutionize Somalia. It could give Somalis a reason to stay at home. When will you be able to tap that wealth? Because it'll take years of foreign expertise and investment.
Well, the first step one has to do is to first gather information. And we have started that step. We have recently entered a seismic option agreement with a company that's based in London to do...
Can you name it?
Well, it's Soma Oil and Gas Company Limited. It's and their task is to actually collect data and get geological information so that we can move to the next stage of exploitation and production of oil and gas.
Briefly, as a last question, what is your pitch? What is your main message? How do you view Somalia in the next 10 years?
Well, the message that I came with me and the message I delivered to the participants of that summit was that we are ready for investment, but we also have to think about the long-term plan for the nation. You cannot benefit from oil and gas if you don't manage your resources well. And one of the things that we have done and we are doing right now is to put in place regulatory frameworks that will guide us to manage our natural resources well and to avoid natural resource curse.
Abdi Razak Omar, thank you very much. Mohammed joining us there in our London studio. That is the Natural Resources Minister of Somalia. Pauline.
Well, Nina, we're going to turn to the health sector right now. And Britain's biggest drug company, GlaxoSmithKline, has carried out a clinical trial in Africa that dramatically cut malaria infections in children. Now, the vaccine is known as RTSS, and it almost halved the number of malaria cases in children who got the first jab between the ages of 5 months and 17 months. Now, in younger babies, it was less effective. Malaria infections went down by 25%. The World Health Organization says more than 600,000 people a year die from malaria, most of them children in sub-Saharan Africa. GlaxoSmithKline developed the vaccine with the cooperation of the U.S. nonprofit organization called PATH Malaria Vaccine Initiative. Dr. David Kaslow, the director of PATH, tells CNN it is a major breakthrough.
This translates into really significantly reducing the pain and suffering, because malaria continues to be such a huge disease burden. About 1,000 children die every day of malaria in Africa. And what this study has also shown is that the vaccine seems to work across a variety of different transmission settings where the disease still occurs in Africa.
Well, despite this breakthrough in this trial, investors don't seem to be very impressed at the moment because GlaxoSmithKline's stock price right now is trading down by 1%, Maggie.
All right, Pauline, thank you so much. Let's turn our attention to e-cigarettes. It's a topic we've talked about a lot. EU lawmakers have voted to put new limits on advertising for electronic cigarettes, but they have rejected a proposal to label them as medical products. Supporters of e-cigarettes say that would have made them a lot harder to get a hold of than tobacco. Vaping, as smoking an e-cigarette as known, turns a nicotine solution into vapor. The makers say it's healthier than than smoking actual cigarettes. Other people say it's just as bad and it doesn't help smokers kick the habit. A lot of controversy surrounding this. U.S. Food and Drug Administration was supposed to issue its own guidelines on e-cigarettes this month, but that could be delayed because of the government shutdown, which has weaves itself into every story we do, it seems like. Vivian Azer is an analyst who follows the tobacco sector for Citi Research, and she joins us now. Vivian, so great to see you today. Let's start with that EU ruling. I know a lot of people were looking at this as maybe the first shot on what sort of regulatory problems e-cigs might have. Is this a victory? Is this the best outcome they could have hoped for?
Good morning. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, absolutely. I think the absence of regulation net is a positive out of the EU. So it seems, in our opinion, that every individual member state will now be in a position to determine how they'll regulate e-cigarettes independently.
And meanwhile, as the sort of, the two camps, and there is a lot of controversy about this, all the doctors we've spoken to say, listen, it's just too early to tell yet. We're doing a lot of tests on it. But meanwhile, while we wait for that, these companies are spending like crazy on advertising, which they've really been closed out of. And you've got the major cigarette companies involved now, too. What is that going to mean for this industry? It's not just these startups. It's the big tobacco companies that are throwing their hat in here.
Absolutely. I think that there's a recognition across all of global tobacco that there is consumer interest for next generation products. And so in the U.S., you've seen Lorillard acquire Blue e-cigs, Reynolds American has introduced Vuse, and Altria has introduced Mark 10. And yeah, while advertising isn't restricted, these manufacturers are going to do their best to, garner visibility for their own products.
And what does that mean? Brand building was such a big part of traditional tobacco, as we all know. But for those of us who can remember the time when they were allowed to advertise, what is this going to mean? Is this going to determine who the winners and losers are here, the ones who are able to best sort of build out that brand and capture this new audience?
Certainly, given the newness of the product category, marketing and branding is important. I think the impact of it will largely be determined by FDA regulation. And as you rightly pointed out, delay because of the government shutdown could push out deeming regulation. But we do fully expect that advertising would be one of the areas that the FDA would address outright. There were 40 state attorneys generals last month that advocated that the FDA start restricting advertising on e-cigarettes. So we think that will be a target.
Vivian, you're advising clients. There's been a lot of interest. A lot of these stocks are doing well because this is seen as this next huge market. Do you think it's going to be allowed to exist in the way it seems to be going so far? I mean, when it comes down to the wire, are the regulators going to intervene here and limit the e-cig availability? Do you think that's just a matter of time, or could they actually meet some of these growth forecasts that are out there?
Well, certainly I think regulation is on the horizon. In fact, the major manufacturers are advocating some of it. As an example, age verification and age restrictions, as these are tobacco products, the major manufacturers want to limit the availability to underage potential users. But in terms of the growth trajectory, I think that's largely going to be dictated by non-federal regulation, but in fact, state regulation. A lot of states are considering right now whether e-cigarettes should be banned from indoor use. I think that will dramatically impact the rate of adoption and retention in that category.
It's fascinating to watch it happen, and maybe this time the tobacco companies learning from some of the past mistakes. It's expensive to live in a courtroom, isn't it? So maybe they'll use some of that past experience as they navigate this next regulatory phase. Vivian, thank you so much. We're out of time, but thank you so much for coming and sharing your thoughts. It's a question we get a lot of interest in, these e-cigs. It's something that comes up a lot. Appreciate seeing you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, after the break, it is all about the Benjamins. Benjamin Franklin still graces the new $100 bill, but there are plenty of subtle changes. CNN has been talking to a member of the design team.
அடிக்கடி கரண்ட் ஆஃப் ஆறதுனால நான் கடையை மூடிடலான்னு இருந்தேன். ஆனா இன்னைக்கு பிசினஸ் எக்ஸ்பேன்ஷன் பண்ணலாம்னு முடிவு பண்ணிருக்கேன்.
Ardhi hii ilikuwa tasa. Hakuna maji, hakuna chakula. Kisha siku moja maisha yetu ilibadilika.
People ask how I keep smiling in such a critical place. I say thanks to Kirloskar.
Kirloskarக்கு நன்றி. அது என் வாழ்க்கையை மாத்திடுச்சு.
Kilota ilibadilisha hatima yetu.
It's a new dawn in Africa. And our enormous potential and opportunities have been harnessed by one bank. UBA, United Bank for Africa, stands strong as the bank of choice for Africans and Africa-related businesses, uniting African people and businesses with the world. So, make the wise choice today. Bank with UBA, Africa's global bank.
Barack Obama will be re-elected President of the United States.
There seems to be no pattern to the attacks unless they are designed to sow fear among the civilians.
This is the reality of what kids think about race.
This is CNN.
The Taliban tried to kill her for going to school. They only made her stronger. Her name is Malala, and she talks to CNN's Christiane Amanpour. Her story, her future, her dreams. The bravest girl in the world. Monday on CNN.
Well, the new $100 bill is different. First of all, it's only worth $10. And people are upset. Financial purists, monetary purists are upset because Ben Franklin, who has long been on the $100 bills, been replaced by Ben Affleck. Well...
David Letterman on the new $100 bill, which debuts today. It was delayed for 3 years. CNN's Richard Quest spoke to a member of the design team who worked on the security features of the new and improved C-Note. Sonia Danberg is a senior financial services analyst from the Federal Reserve Board.
Well, we've incorporated some brand new technology for U.S. banknotes into the redesigned $100 note, most notably this blue 3D security ribbon that appears to the right of Franklin's portrait. We wanted to make sure that we absolutely got the design and production right before we put them into circulation. I'm pleased to report the Federal Reserve currently has approximately $3.5 billion of these $100 notes in our inventories, which we certainly think is sufficient to meet domestic and international demand for it.
So you've got this blue stripe, and then there's the colour tint that when you twist the thing one way and another, that all changes colour within it. And it's all to do with keeping one step ahead of the counterfeiters, isn't it?
That's exactly right. So we redesign our currency for security reasons to stay ahead of counterfeiting threats. So it's a proactive rather than a reactive news. We have relatively low rates of counterfeiting for U.S. currency. So on this base of over $1 trillion worth of Federal Reserve notes in circulation, less than 1/100th of that is reported as counterfeit every year. But we take each one of those instances really seriously because, of course, it represents an economic loss.
Oh, speaking of money, in the UK, a range of coins commemorating Prince George's christening was unveiled today. The limited edition gold coin will be sold for 50,000 British pounds, around about 80,000 US dollars. Meanwhile, the cheapest coin costs just £5. That's around about $8. The Royal Mint says that it's already received thousands of pre-orders. I must say, Maggie, the one we were just showing you behind me seemed to be the size of somebody's palm. So it's almost the size of a plate rather than a coin. Hard to put in your pocket.
Oh, how convenient. All right, check that one off the list. And Lord knows I'm never going to see a $100 bill, so I'm out of this whole currency thing. No good for me. Let's take one last look at U.S. markets. Only in England would that happen. We are just sitting at the flat line. Listen, everyone's on the sidelines waiting for Washington to sort the mess out. We're also going to be watching for earnings. They're not coming yet, but people probably trying to have some meetings to figure out how to position for what is looking like it's going to be a pretty weak earnings season as well. So not a lot of good news out there to spark any buying. We should be thankful maybe that we're not seeing more selling. And that is it from all of us here at WBT. We'll see you again next time.
Senior executives, the world is changing. Do you want to move with it? The HEC Executive MBA offers you an intensive experience on 3 different continents. Luxury, aerospace, energy. Only with the HEC Executive MBA can you choose from specialized majors of this worldwide degree. The HEC Executive MBA opens up a world of opportunities. HEC, the more you know, the more you dare.
Shelter is the most basic need in our lives. Nigeria, a nation of over 160 million people. Real estate contributes less than 5% to the economy, leaving Africa's second largest economy with over 17 million housing deficit. 3 Invest Limited invites you to connect with top real estate professionals at Real Estate Unite Lagos 2013, a conference, exhibition, and awards on October 17th and 18th at the Civic Center, Lagos. Real Estate Unite 2013, brought to you by 3 Invest Limited, supported by Diamond Bank, ARM, and UPDC.
Exploring stars and nebulas under the night skies of Namibia. On the next Inside Africa, spend the night stargazing with astronomers and discover why Namibia is such a special place for cosmic exploration. Inside Africa, Wednesday only on CNN, in association with Zenith Bank.
This month on CNN Business Traveler,
there's a tendency for you to need to slow down.
We're learning how to chill out. Music. With experts in packing.
The tighter I roll them, the less the wrinkles.
Organization.
Everybody feels overwhelmed.
And meditation.
And just let go.
It's the Road Warrior.